Story 1. Last year, a man climbed over a fence at Kings Island to retrieve his keys that had fallen from his pocket. He was struck by a coaster and later died in the hospital. Story 2. I worked at Knott's Berry Farm in 1999 in a souvenir shop next to the Ghost Rider, a very popular roller coaster. Peak times, the wait could be 4 to 5 hours. One day, 2 crying children walked in. It turned out their parents had gone on the Ghost Rider hours before, telling them to wait. The children were terrified they had been abandoned, and all they could think to do was have someone call their grandmother in Mexico to come get them. Security took them, and I heard they found the parents in line and pulled them out to care for their children. I don't know if the parents were kicked out of the park or not. Story 3. The park where I worked had a ride that was relatively new at the time and quite popular. It had to close when it rained because the brakes would not function properly when wet, and having guests trapped on a ride would be bad for business. One day, it started raining, and I received the instruction to shut it down. Following standard procedure, I placed a chain across the entrance, then set a barrel-shaped garbage can in front of the chain, and finally positioned a large A-frame sign that read in giant red letters, "This ride is closed," in front of the garbage can. After that, I went to the loading area to wait out the rain with the rest of the crew. We watched a man notice that there was no line for the ride and rushed to the entrance. We saw him read the sign, or at least glance at it, look at the garbage can, and check the chain. He then moved the sign to one side, pushed the garbage can aside, unclipped the chain, and ran through to the loading area. He was utterly shocked when he was informed that the ride was closed and that he could not board. Story 4. On the train, right after I said to keep all hands inside and before entering the tunnel, the fraternity member who wanted to scare the girls by hitting the side of the tunnel ended up breaking his arm instead. Story 5. I worked at Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I did not witness the event but saw the aftermath. We had a line jumping policy where anyone who line jumped would be escorted from the park. Some guests attempted to line jump and were removed. It started with a group of around 10 people who were yelling at security. More members of their bus trip joined in, reportedly increasing their number to between 50 and 100. The situation escalated, resulting in fights and nearly causing a riot outside the park. Multiple police officers arrived, and they closed the park to all entry and exit. Injuries were reported, but nothing serious occurred. Following the incident, the park increased security presence. Story 6. Not a guest, a fellow worker. We were cleaning the big slide, made of metal that you ride down on a burlap sack with kerosene because the wrong type of wax had been applied, making it sticky. We carefully positioned our feet into the joints, wiping hot metal in the sun with a rag in one hand and a can of kerosene in the other. A fellow worker decided to speed up the process by sitting on the kerosene-soaked rag and sliding down. Emergency medical services was called to treat his burns. Story 7. This woman came to my pizza stall, and instead of ordering an overpriced pizza slice, she pulled out a full frozen salmon and asked me if she could keep it in my refrigerator while she was doing rides. When I said no, she insisted on speaking to my manager because she thought it was unfair and claimed that we had a lot of space in our walk-in refrigerator. Story 8. Dipping their fingers in the water on a log flume. The boats hit the side, and you risked breaking your fingers at a minimum. If we saw you doing it, you would get shouted at. If you continued, you would be asked to leave. Story 9. To me, it seemed unreasonable, but I guess this lady thought it was justified. I worked in food service when this woman came to the park by herself, visited our restaurant, and ordered chicken. The chicken was perfectly fine, but she complained about it, so I offered her a new plate with a larger portion. Still not satisfied, she complained to my manager, who issued a refund after the second plate. The woman then requested to speak with my manager's supervisor, so 2 area managers came in. They had a lengthy conversation, but she was still unhappy, so they referred her to customer service. I happened to know the area manager outside of work and asked about the situation with that woman. He explained that she was aware of the company policy regarding customer satisfaction and knew they would go above and beyond for her. In the end, she received a handful of free tickets for her family just for coming in and complaining throughout the day. Felt like a waste of time to pursue that route. Season tickets were not that expensive back then in the late 1990s. Story 10. I used to sell novelty toys at a popular theme park in Southern California. It was around 9 to 10 a.m. and the park was empty, but I was blowing bubbles with a toy we sold. As expected, a guest approached me and asked if I could blow the bubbles in another direction because they were getting in her face. I told her I couldn't control the wind, but she could move. She reported me to the main office, and my boss found the situation amusing. Story 11. One of those rides where a bunch of swings are dangling on chains and connected to a huge disc that spins them all around, and the centrifugal force shoots them off to the side. I saw someone jump off one of those while under the influence of a substance and land in the free throw game, shooting a basketball for a stuffed dragon. He broke his legs but didn't notice because of the substance and started throwing stuffed dragons out to onlookers shouting, "Free Rodney King." I really wish I was making that up. Story 12. Not a worker, but I was on a whitewater rapid boat ride. The boat was circular and got stuck spinning in the water, bumping against a barrel designed to propel boats forward. A guy reached out to push off the spinning barrel and broke his wrist. Story 13. About 20 years ago, I was in line for a ride at Worlds of Fun in Kansas City. I was probably 12 or 13. There was a group of about 8 girls around the same age hanging back in the line and waving everyone on, saying, "Go ahead." We could tell something was off. Park maintenance eventually showed up and cleared everyone out of the area. One girl from the group was still there, leaning over the barrier, the type amusement parks use to designate where the line goes, similar to a railing on a deck. This girl had lodged her kneecap in a gap between the rails and couldn't get it back out. Her foot was dangling behind her, with several boys trying to pull the metal apart just enough to free her. She didn't seem to be in pain, just humiliated. She was still stuck when I got on the roller coaster. I am happy to report that I was back there about 6 years ago. She wasn't there, so they must have been able to get her out. Story 14. I saw a mother and her son sitting on a bench. The son was approximately 7 years old. The mother was looking away from the child when a seagull landed right next to him. He picked it up, and the bird didn't panic or fly away. He turned back to his mother and said, "Mom, look what I have." She turned, her face filled with shock, and started saying, "Put it down." Is that foolish? Not necessarily. I just have never seen a bird get that close and remain calm. Story 15. It was a super windy fall day when an old man approached me and said, "Walt would be spinning in his grave to see all these leaves on the ground. Where do people complain?" I pointed with 2 fingers to City Hall and off he went. Story 16. Worked for the mouse. On the first day back open from COVID, a lady brought a tabletop open flame grill and started cooking hot dogs, unmasked, for her family at Disney Springs. She then wondered why she was getting kicked out and argued with security about the reasons. Story 17. Hey everyone, backpacks need to be placed in the free lockers over there. How much do the free lockers cost? Where are they? Story 18. I worked as an on-the-job trainer and photographer at Discovery Cove, the other SeaWorld park where you can legally swim with dolphins and enjoy unlimited draft beer. One day, a woman approached me, insisting that the trainers were demanding she engage in outrageous behavior to participate in the dolphin interaction. It turned out the outrageous behavior involved simply entering the water to reach and touch the dolphin. She insisted that we could bring the dolphin out for her to touch, which was a brief possibility but not realistic. She wanted the entire interaction while the dolphin remained beached. Her rationale for not entering the water was that she had not thought she would need a swimsuit to swim with dolphins. Other highlights included a guest who seriously asked, "When do you drain the tanks and make them fight?" When I replied in confusion, she persisted, asking, "When do you put all the whales and dolphins into the big pond and make them fight? You do that, right?" Another guest, within 30 minutes of my first solo shift, inquired about renting a parrot and became angrily upset when I told him I needed to ask another team member if we rented parrots, or if it was a discount parrot rental day. He stormed off while still yelling, trying to eat a turkey leg with some difficulty. We did not rent parrots, nor were they available at a discounted rate that day or any other. My favorite groups were tourists asking for directions to attractions that did not exist in our park or in any other theme parks in Florida. Children frequently confused us with Animal Kingdom, often commenting, "Wow, this place is so much worse than I thought it would be." The whole job was quite an experience. Story 19. A woman is pushing a stroller when a duck falls from the sky directly into it. She then pushes the stroller roughly 6 feet away and starts yelling, "Get away from my baby," as if the duck understands English. Story 20. I used to work at the ticket booths. One of our jobs was to stand outside and ensure people didn't jump the chains. When a guest attempted to jump the chains and fell, we had to call the medical team. Story 21. I worked for a small amusement park in the suburbs of Chicago 20 years ago. I once broke up a fight between two women who were arguing because one cut in front of the other in the funnel cake line. When I say fighting, I mean one woman had grabbed the other's hair, twisted her down, and was hitting her in the face. I intervened and pushed that woman against a wall. Security then arrived, and both were removed from the park. I have many stories from that place. Story 22. The number of people who forget that their babies count as individuals is astounding. Every day, while working in a Fantasyland, I have to recount and regroup guests because, obviously, the baby doesn't count. Fine, I will cram all 5 of you into one Dumbo elephant and let me know how that works out for you. Story 23. A partner works at Disneyland. A customer complained that it was raining because she believed the park had an invisible dome that prevented rain. Story 24. I worked at a magical kingdom some years ago. I have many stories about entitled guests and wonderful people I met during my time there, but one stands out. I was working with the ice cream carts and had been at every single cart in that park. One day, I was at the popcorn and chow cart in front of Storybook Circus, and our carts could see the Dumbo ride. It was not too busy in the parks that day, and most of the rides had no waiting. As Dumbo was loading its next group of riders, a woman screamed in horror. We turned around and watched as she picked up her toddler and ran away from the ride. We thought someone might have had an accident on the ride or perhaps left something unpleasant and hadn't informed anyone. A cast member went to check, then told everyone to leave and was contacting their leadership team. 2 minutes after the leadership team arrived, we were all curious, including some guests who wanted snacks, as an entire group of security personnel showed up and surrounded the elephant car on the ride. 2 officers from the local police department arrived, wearing gloves and carrying a paper bag. We were all anxious to find out what they had discovered in the car. They talked for about 10 minutes when my leadership arrived and saw that while we were helping guests, we were also watching the situation unfold. We informed them about the woman screaming, and we still did not know what was on the ride. Then we heard a man shouting, "It's mine! It's mine!" He ran to the ride and explained that what was on it was his. We all witnessed the officer lift it from the car. It was a handgun. This man had it concealed, and this was before the park installed metal detectors when they only checked bags and strollers. He had it in a holster underneath his shirt, and when he was on the ride with his child, it fell out. We watched as the family was escorted out of the park, with the local police behind the father and security following the family. Story 25. The most ridiculous question I have ever been asked, and brace yourselves, this one is a doozy. I am sitting in my tour guide seat on a tram at a theme park in Southern California. The tour has not started yet. I am playing a media clip as the tram finishes loading. An older lady in the front row reaches forward and taps me on my knee. "Excuse me, miss?" "Yes." She points off to the San Gabriel Mountains to our right. "Are those mountains?" "I'm sorry, what?" "Are those mountains?" "Yes, yes, they are." She sat back, nodded, and did not bother me for the rest of the tour. Story 26. We had closed off a path for a serious medical emergency. It was hot, and the guests were upset about walking a different route, so I was sent to the barricade to support the staff member holding the position. I was explaining that it was an emergency, and most people understood. However, one woman was losing her composure. She insisted that she needed to go that way immediately as it was the fastest route to a show she wanted to see. She even told me, "What's the big deal? I could just step over the person who had the emergency. And why can the paramedics go through? While we were there, several sheriff's deputies arrived, escorting emergency medical services. This woman saw the open barricade, dashed past it, and ran straight into the deputy who had paused on the other side. She didn't even have the sense to apologize, exclaiming, "Let me through." He was not amused. The last I saw, the sheriff was escorting her away from the barricade toward the park security office, while her screaming children trailed behind. We reopened in 10 minutes. She was removed from the theme park over a 10-minute wait. Story 27. My brother worked at Cedar Point in the 1970s at a small food stand outside of a ride called the Witch's Wheel, which spun around at various angles, including upside down. He said he saw many people eat and then go on that ride. It was a big mistake. It wasn't uncommon to see several riders vomit during the ride or upon exiting. Story 28. A woman once elbowed me in the head, giving me a concussion and sending me to the hospital because she needed to be first in line to meet Anna and Elsa. Story 29. I worked in concessions. A guest asked if our water was diet. I replied, "It's water." We went back and forth a bit until he walked away empty-handed. Story 30. From the guest's perspective, while in line for Rise of the Resistance at Disney World, I started fiddling with some buttons to get a reaction. A cast member broke character and said, "Those are real buttons." I still think about this and feel a bit embarrassed every time. Story 31. In the 1980s, my girlfriend worked security at Knott's Berry Farm. They had just decided to open a dance venue called Studio K to boost evening attendance. It quickly became a magnet for gang members. Every night, she was breaking up fights between girls and confiscating butterfly knives and other weapons from them. Story 32. I'll try to keep this vague in case it blows up. I worked at an amusement park in my early 20s while I was attending college. I worked on a few different rides during my time there, but most of my time was spent running an aerial carousel. For those unfamiliar, that's the official name for a Dumbo-style ride. For the most part, I loved it because I was never busy, but my ride was one of the only ones in the whole park without a mandatory height requirement. To ride alone, you had to be 4 feet tall, but any child could ride with their parents as long as they sat in the middle of a 3-person car. Generally, this was fine, but I swear at least once a day I had someone try to break the rules. They tried to lift the child up Lion King style, they attempted to lap sit after they were in the air, or they let the small child out of their seatbelt and allowed them to lean precariously out of their vehicle. All kinds of dangerous behavior. It was infuriating because I knew it only took one slip for a child to fall and get seriously injured or worse. That ride went at least 10 feet high, but people always acted like I was the problem. This is not really a story about a single stupid person, but the collective recklessness has always stuck with me. Every day, at least one person risked their child's life for no real reason other than it was deemed cool. Story 33. There weren't any employees by the mouse, but there was one at the park. On the monorail, we stopped at the hotel we are staying at. I think it was the Polynesian, but I don't remember. A lady got on and asked 3 or 4 people how to get to SeaWorld. Bless their hearts, someone even told her to stay on the monorail until the last stop at Epcot, get off and make a left. The lady actually believed her. Story 34. Not an amusement park worker, but I have an experience to share. When I was about 12, I went on a school trip to Disneyland in Paris. During the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, a child somehow managed to unlock his seatbelt and stand up mid-ride. The ride stopped about 5 seconds later, and they took us out from an artificial river, literally through the water into a back door that led to an employee parking lot, banning us for the rest of the day. Long story short, that child is now struggling with addiction. Story 35. Our park had a log ride. The log ascended a small hill, splashed down into the water, looped around to ascend a larger hill, splashed down again, and then returned to the starting point. A woman with her 2 toddlers decided the first hill was too scary and exited before reaching the second hill. However, they left the log on the inside of the loop with running water between them and any exit. At 18 years old, I thought the best solution was to toss the toddlers one at a time across the water and then have the mother leap across. In hindsight, I'm fortunate we weren't sued. Story 36. I didn't work there, but I have a funny story from a time when I was on the Tatsu coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain about 10 years ago. It's a suspension coaster where you are strapped in standing up, then tilt forward so you are basically hanging underneath the track face down like a hang glider. We reached the end of the ride where it stopped right before entering the station, and we were just hanging face down about 3 feet from the metal floor. A girl 2 rows in front of me tried to take out her phone and dropped it. She reached for it for about 30 seconds before we started moving back into the station. I heard her asking the attendant, and he said she would have to wait until the end of the day to retrieve it after the rides were shut down. Story 37. I didn't directly work for one, but my company used to do work for a major theme park, not Disney. The woman we dealt with at the park informed us that after a serious accident, the number of group reservations decreased, while the number of individual guests visiting the park increased. Story 38. My time to shine. I worked at a theme park as a teenager. I witnessed a huge fight between 2 women. One even lost part of her scalp during the hair-pulling incident. I was in a booth that directly faced it. A line of employees came running to respond. Before they could intervene, though, someone pulled out pepper spray in a crowded amusement park. Over a dozen people, including children, were affected. My boss got it full in the face, and a friend had to go to the hospital after inhaling some. It was absolute chaos. The children were largely upsetting. I saw parents literally dragging kids. I only encountered one situation where I thought, yes, that's needed, during all the time I worked there. Story 39. I wasn't a worker, but I saw 2 teenagers get off a roller coaster, both vomit, and then excitedly run to get back in line for the same ride. Story 40. Several years ago, I saw on television the story of a man who shot a security guard with a BB gun and forced him to open a roller coaster so he and his family could ride. The Special Weapons and Tactics team was called to escort them out of the park. He should have listened to the warning outside. Story 41. When I worked at 18, I had a guest attempt to ride the Ferris wheel while holding a giant inflatable unicorn. He believed it was a great idea to bring it with him. Story 42. Not me, but my supervisor had this experience back in the late 1990s. I have been wanting to share this story forever. We worked at a zoo, and every Christmas we would have Christmas lights, which we still do. One night, the manager was doing his rounds when he saw a trail of blood leading toward the gift shop. It wasn't long before he spotted a very wobbly and very drunk woman leaning against a post, smoking a cigarette with blood dripping down her hands. The manager was, of course, very concerned and told her to follow him to the back of the gift shop, where they soon noticed that she had one glove on her left hand, while the other hand was gloveless, covered in blood, and missing a finger. My supervisor went over to keep an eye on her, while the manager and several others went to follow the blood trail to find out what happened. It turns out that in her drunken state, she had climbed not 1, not 2, but 3 barriers to pet the kitty, the zoo's Siberian tiger. The tiger bit her finger off with the glove still on. So fortunately, she found the taste of cotton gross and moved on without consuming the finger. The zoo kept the finger as evidence until the woman's lawyer showed up to pick it up. Yes, she did try to sue, and I'm pretty sure she lost the case. Story 43. To see the most absurd things an amusement park has done, watch the documentary Class Action Park. Welcome to Action Park, the notorious 1980s New Jersey water park that has long entered the realm of myth. Story 44. Break into the park by climbing over a fence, enter the alligator enclosure, and then evade security by climbing back over the fence to escape. He then posted the entire ordeal on his YouTube channel, which led to his arrest. Story 45. I worked a short stint at a children's car ride in the summer of 2016. The policy was that a child needed to be 48 inches tall to drive, but could be any height to ride alongside an adult. When I saw parents in line with toddlers about a foot tall, I often wondered if they would attempt to place them in the driver's seat. More often than not, they did, and we had to stop the entire ride until they ceased that practice. What's the difference between 12 and 48 inches? Apparently not much. Story 46. I worked at a children's amusement park while I was in college. And there are many stories from parents yelling at me when their child was too short to be safe, to teenagers dangling from the carousel mechanisms like monkey bars. The most absurd question I ever received was when I was operating a little train that went around the property. Why doesn't the train have a steering wheel? I paused for a moment, trying to think of a response that wouldn't sound rude or sarcastic. What I finally said was, it has tracks. Story 47. As a teenager, I worked in a game arcade inside an amusement park. We had a coin pusher machine that, after inserting a quarter, offered a chance for the pushing mechanism to push additional quarters to the prize dispenser. It had a large sign warning people not to bump or tilt the machine. It was an extremely heavy machine, requiring significant strength to move. If someone did manage to move it, it would lock up, and a big yellow beacon would start flashing. At least once a day, someone would attempt to cheat by trying to move the machine, but it never worked. We would simply come over, unlock it, reset it, and walk away. The guests who tried would inevitably ask for their money back, and we would just point to the sign. Story 48. Dad left his young child alone while he went on the ride. A few minutes later, he returned and said he had given the unattended child his wallet to hold during the ride, but the child lost it, and there was over $5,000 in it. He was shocked that we wouldn't just hand over $5,000 because, as the ride operator, I should have monitored his unattended child instead of focusing on the ride. Story 49. A few years ago, a girl in Melbourne, Australia, was on a roller coaster when her phone fell out of her pocket. Once she got off the ride, she climbed through a fence to retrieve it and was hit. She survived but sustained severe long-term injuries. Her family attempted to take legal action against the ride operators, but the safety regulator found that the operators were not at fault. Story 50. I worked at a food pavilion in a small amusement park as a teenager making fresh-cut fries. We had a condiment cart in the middle of the pavilion with the usual items: ketchup, ranch, honey mustard, salt, and malt vinegar. A man came up and complained that the vinegar tasted bad and bitter. A coworker asked him to bring the bottle he used. It turned out he accidentally sprayed his fries with a bottle of cleaner that was left on the stand. Story 51. My whole family was nearly killed when a ride operator failed to inform us about a tunnel. It was the last train back to the parking lot, and they allowed us to ride in an open-top carriage while standing, as there was nowhere else to sit and no other option to return. We had never taken this train before. My dad only just spotted the tunnel in time for us all to duck down. So, it's not always a matter of people being careless. Sometimes it's the responsibility of those in charge. Story 52. Worked in entertainment at various parks as an independent contractor. A father pushed a baby stroller with an infant directly under my stilts once. He looked at me like he was the funniest person ever. I am a professional, but I'm also freestyle dancing, and if I had been looking the wrong way, in the spring of 2021, as people stopped sheltering at home due to vaccines hitting the market, 8-foot-tall fans were placed in the park blowing misted water. People stood in front of them in a county with a very low vaccination rate, while COVID-19 was still a concern and still affecting lives. The women who dressed me and were my handlers and photographers during Halloween also worked at one of the haunted houses. They were constantly groped and punched. I volunteered to be a bouncer for a dancer I shared a green room with because she was tired of being groped by guests as she walked through the crowd to the stage. A child rapidly ran into my stilts once. He darted out of an arcade where I was taking pictures. He rounded the corner and clipped my left leg while running behind my handler. Luckily, I was on 4-legged stilts, so I didn't fall. Wildcard category. Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, during Hallowscream, had an extraordinary number of police cars parked backstage to remove unruly guests. You could purchase beer and cocktails within a 3-minute walk of any beer stand, and the atmosphere was as vibrant as a rock concert. I still experience anxiety from being in a large creature suit on stilts in the dark in that environment. Hearing children say things like, "Let's push him over," maliciously and clearly. Story 53. My daughter worked at Hershey Park, and someone attempted to bring their baby on Skyrush. When they were informed that it was not allowed, they tried to leave the baby in the bag drop area. Story 54. I was really hoping for more Final Destination or Adventure Park type stories, but I'm not disappointed. I meant park, but Parm is funny, so I'll keep it. I should probably add my experience. I was working at a water slide park, and the owner was notoriously cheap. Everyone knew it, but hey, I was getting $14 per hour as a teenager. A woman flew out from the volcano tunnel. One of our water slides went through a volcano and over the edge. It was not so funny to witness. I also worked at and managed a ropes course with zip lines. I saw my fair share of people grab the cable, and their hands were ripped to shreds. The worst I witnessed was a kid trying to climb our rock wall, which very explicitly says, "Do not climb without employee assistance." While we had an employee stationed there, they also had to be vigilant about everything else happening on the ground. This litterbug found time to start climbing and fell, breaking his wrist. Could have been a lot worse, but the employee felt awful. Story 55. A child thought it would be funny to break one of the landscape lights. A supervisor caught the group. The child's father came over yelling at him, likely because he had to pay for the damage. Another incident involved a man who tried to jump out of a car before it came to a stop. I, as the ride operator, had to stop him and tried to hold him down, but I had to let go for my own safety. Fortunately, I had a witness in case he attempted to complain. I'm a woman trying to prevent a man from falling onto the ride tracks. People leave their common sense at the entrance. Additionally, you should never jump out of a car on an indoor ride. For older rides, there is often another 6-foot drop underneath the tracks. In some areas, the cars themselves can push you into the wall. Story 56. Valley Fair, Minnesota. A man wanted to ride the swing carousel but was denied due to exceeding the weight limit. He likely weighed around 325 pounds, and the seatbelt harness would not fit. He had a 15-minute argument with the supervisor, which prevented others from enjoying the ride. The line was long, and the day was hot. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.